A creator that you almost certainly follow just posted a racist, bigoted, homophobic misinformation firestorm. Let's watch.
All around the world to all sorts of developing nations. Looks like it's mostly AIDS drugs, which is an insane...
That's because it takes a very large company with worldwide connections to deliver any sort of pharmaceutical drug, especially because customs in every single country has different laws. They need to be handled correctly to be used. You say that it's drugs, but actually infant incubators, oxygen, and all sorts of medical equipment, like what they would use in surgeries, for example, is part of this. And they are one of the biggest companies in the United States capable of doing this, besides Jon Snow, which we'll get to in a minute.
Insane amount of money. Side note, can anyone describe to me why the AIDS epidemic is such a problem in Africa? Like, are they all doing heroin? Are they all having butt sex?
Now, I know you didn't get on the internet the same day that 150 women were raped and burned alive in Africa and wondered if it was gay butt sex, but maybe you just needed to throw homophobia into it. Actually, the major reasons that AIDS is so widespread in Africa has to do with polygamy. It has to do with lack of reproductive health access, as well as education and gender disparities, meaning women don't get the opportunity to choose if they have sex or who they have sex with. Now, 80% of all AIDS that is sexually transmitted in Africa or more is between heterosexual couples. We also know that a majority of the children in Africa with AIDS were fucking born with it, furthering my argument that this is largely heterosexual. Misinformation and shame is another big one, because they're either going to not know they have it, they're not going to be able to control whether or not they spread it because they don't know where it came from, and if they do, they're concerned with shame, making you exhibit A for part of the problem.
Kind of stuff. There is this dude, Gunjan, who has worked for Disney Plus and Amazon Fire TV and Prime Digital and Amazon Studios. And why is that experience?
So you find the first brown person associated with this government contractor that you've admittedly said you don't understand to try to question their credentials. Now, it might not make sense to you while he worked at all of those organizations, but something else you don't know. He is actually a Harvard graduate, and he was also Walgreens Boots Alliance Chief Digital Officer, because all of these healthcare companies are using digital spaces to reach more people, both in terms of getting the care they need, but also the education they need. And remember what I told you about the problem in Africa. They don't have the education. He is also on OneCare's board of directors, which helps people in workers' comp situations access Medicare and Medicaid needs. Both of those things.
The firm offers capacity building, communications, corporate social responsibility, knowledge management, performance management, and appraisal and program design services. What does any of that mean?
Where software to process applications, software to apply for help, software to make sure they know where their money's going. It's usually referred to as an SAS contract.
You start looking up the company and find articles about them. You find articles like this one that state that, this is back in 2017, in the first quarter of 2017, only 7% of the health commodity shipments delivered through this program arrived at their destination on time. And
now you want to lie with statistics. So that statistic is from January to March of 2017. This was the very first year that Chemtronics actually got this contract with the United States government. Before they ever had this contract with the United States government, it was always JSI that had it. Now, JSI actually had begun to have a lot of problems with the USAID. For example, they had sent a whole bunch of incubators to Egypt, like 90% of them didn't work, and there was this whole dispute over who should pay for it, and it was just continuously ongoing because, like I said, this contractor is pretty much a general contractor. They're supposed to make sure things get there, that the things they get there work, and they should have some level of accountability for their equipment or the equipment they contract that doesn't work. So in short, Jon Snow was not what was best for the taxpayers. Now, there's something called an RFP, and again, you've proven not to know how government contracts works. This is when the departments put out a request for a proposal. When they put out a request for a proposal, it is their job to be good stewards of American taxpayer dollars, to go with who's going to give you the most bang for their buck, or do the job most efficiently, get done what it is we need done. Now, USAID, who had been working with JSI for a very long time, surprised everyone when they went with Chemtronics, in part because of all the issues with JSI. And they stated, we feel like this is the best way to honor the taxpayer money. JSI was getting just as much money as Chemtronics. But something very interesting happened. JSI actually tried to appeal it in different courts all over the place, holding up Chemtronics taking over by many months. And they also had control of the warehouse where most of Chemtronics things were, which would alter the way things were streamlined or delivered, in short. So the 3 months you're referring to are the first 3 months they had this contract, and it was immediately investigated and intervened by the USAID. And what they had found was that this streamlining process was causing it. And that article that you shared, that I will also post, goes on to say that the issue was immediately remedied, and they actually had to go to court and go against previous contractors to make sure that happened.
I've never heard of. And when they're using that massive share of our tax dollars, only 7% of the shipments they're sending are making it.
Stop saying we, because plenty of us actually do know how RFPs and government contracts work. And again, immediately after that, they got the number back up to 80%, which is considered proficient when you are shipping globally.
To their destination? At the time, this was USAID's largest ever contract. And then there's this article. It starts off by talking about this power plant in Afghanistan that these two firms, Black and Veatch and Louis-Berger Group, got a government contract through USAID to build. At least I presume it was through USAID. I don't know if that specific contract was. But then an earthquake or an avalanche happened and it kind of messed the plant up and they never finished it. And now it's producing 2% of the power it was intended to generate. So then the article goes on to explore a number of sort of aid misallocations of funds over the years. And it starts with Hillary Clinton's tenure at the State Department. The company CEO was indicted for siphoning money from USAID reconstruction contracts in Iraq and Afghanistan, because that's what USAID is for. It
was finished. It became underutilized because they got new power lines from the World Bank. And in 2019, they went back to make it more efficient. But your argument here is that some contractors took advantage of the USAID. Imagine that, a big company trying to grift taxpayer dollars, but then they were prosecuted, meaning held accountable.